Late one evening in a small, quiet town, a young woman named Lisa decided to make a quick run to Walmart. The store was one of those 24-hour locations, a beacon of artificial light in an otherwise desolate stretch of road. It was just past midnight, and the parking lot was eerily empty, save for a few scattered cars. Lisa parked close to the entrance, feeling a faint unease as she noticed the dimly lit security cameras hanging limply from their mounts as if forgotten. Inside, the store was unsettlingly quiet. The usual hum of late-night activity was missing. The only sounds were the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights and the distant squeak of a shopping cart being pushed by a figure she couldn't quite see. She shrugged it off and grabbed a cart of her own, heading to the toiletries aisle. As she walked, she noticed something odd. There were no employees around, no one stocking shelves, no one at the registers. Even the customer service desk was abandoned. The emptiness made the vastness of the store feel oppressive. Lisa told herself it was just the time of night, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She moved quickly, grabbing shampoo, toothpaste, and a few other essentials. As she turned into the cereal aisle, she froze. At the far end, a man stood perfectly still, staring at her. He was tall, with stringy hair and a gaunt face. His clothes were disheveled, and there was something off about the way he held himself. Rigid, unnatural. Lisa offered a nervous smile and pushed her cart in the opposite direction. The feeling of being watched stayed with her, prickling the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder and saw him again, this time at the edge of an adjacent aisle, peering around the corner. Lisa's heart began to race. She quickened her pace, heading toward the electronics section, where the bright screens offered a false sense of safety. As she turned the corner, she nearly collided with another person, a woman who looked just as startled as Lisa felt. Relief washed over her at the sight of another customer. "Did you see that guy?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. The woman nodded, her face pale. "He's been following me too. I thought I was imagining it." They decided to stick together, finding comfort in numbers. But as they walked toward the front of the store, they realized something terrifying. The automatic doors were no longer working. The lights above the exit flickered erratically, casting the entrance in a sickly, intermittent glow. Panic began to set in. They tried calling out for help, but their voices echoed unanswered. Lisa pulled out her phone to call 911, but her screen displayed no service, even though she'd had full bars earlier. The other woman's phone was the same. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, emitting a low, distorted hum. Then came a voice, hoarse, guttural, and almost playful. "You shouldn't have come here." The two women bolted, abandoning their carts and running toward the back of the store, hoping to find an emergency exit. As they ran, they heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unrelenting. The sound echoed around them, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. They found the emergency exit door, but it was chained shut, the heavy links rattling as Lisa yanked on them in vain. The other woman spotted a stockroom door and motioned for Lisa to follow. They slipped inside and locked it behind them, plunging into darkness. The faint smell of cleaning supplies and cardboard filled the air as they tried to catch their breath. Minutes felt like hours. They pressed their ears to the door, straining to hear any sign of pursuit. Just as they thought they might be safe, the handle jiggled. Then came the sound of slow, rhythmic knocking. Lisa whispered, "Who's there?" though she already knew no sane answer would come. The knocking stopped, replaced by silence so thick it seemed to hum. The women waited, hardly daring to breathe. Suddenly, the door burst open with a force that sent them sprawling. The gaunt man stood there, his eyes wide and unblinking, his mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Lisa grabbed a nearby broom and swung it at him, but he didn't even flinch. He moved toward them with mechanical precision, his grin never wavering. The women screamed and fled deeper into the stockroom, weaving through towering shelves of merchandise. They found a ladder leading to a loft area and scrambled up, hoping to find a way out through a vent. As they climbed, the man's footsteps grew louder, his shadow stretching grotesquely across the walls. When they reached the top, they found a small window and began prying it open with frantic urgency. Below, the man began to laugh, a low, guttural sound that echoed through the stockroom. "You can't leave," he said, his voice carrying an unnatural echo. You're mine now." Finally, the window gave way, and the women crawled through, dropping into the alley behind the store. They ran without looking back, not stopping until they reached a gas station several blocks away. The attendant called the police, who found the store eerily normal when they arrived, brightly lit, stocked with goods, and staffed as if nothing had happened. But Lisa and the other woman knew the truth. They never shopped at Walmart again. And every so often, late at night, Lisa swore she could still hear that guttural laugh, as if the man were waiting for her to return.
Story number 2.
It was a frigid winter night when Tom, a college student, pulled into the Walmart parking lot. He had been on the road for hours, traveling to visit his parents for the holidays. His gas tank was nearly empty, and his stomach growled in protest. Stopping at the 24-hour Walmart seemed like a sensible choice to refuel himself and grab some road snacks. The store loomed ahead, glowing faintly under flickering fluorescent lights. Unlike the bustling daytime crowds, the place seemed almost abandoned. A handful of cars dotted the expansive lot, but their owners were nowhere in sight. Tom shrugged off the eerie emptiness, chalking it up to the late hour. As he walked through the sliding doors, the familiar whoosh of the entrance seemed louder than usual in the unsettling quiet. Inside, the air felt colder than it should have been. The aisles stretched endlessly, their harsh lighting casting sharp shadows. Tom grabbed a cart and started making his way toward the snacks aisle. The first sign that something was wrong came when he passed by the toy section. A lone doll sat on the edge of a shelf, its eyes following him as he walked. Tom chuckled nervously and glanced back, but the doll's head seemed to have shifted slightly. Its painted smile stretched unnaturally wide. He quickened his pace. Turning into the next aisle, he stopped in his tracks. A man was standing at the far end, his back turned. The man's figure was tall and thin, his clothes oddly outdated, a beige trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He didn't move, didn't shop, just stood there, facing the shelves. Tom cleared his throat awkwardly, hoping the man would notice him and step aside. But the man remained frozen, as if carved from stone. Unnerved, Tom decided to double back and find another route to the snack aisle. As he turned, a soft, wheezing sound echoed through the store, followed by what sounded like faint whispers. Tom stopped and looked around, but there was no one else nearby. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He tried to laugh it off, telling himself he was just tired. Reaching the snack aisle at last, he grabbed a few items and tossed them into his cart. He glanced up at the security mirror mounted in the corner and froze. In the reflection, the man in the trench coat was standing at the end of the aisle, watching him. But when Tom spun around, the aisle was empty. A chill ran down his spine. His breathing quickened as he pushed his cart toward the self-checkout lanes, desperate to get out of the store. But as he approached the registers, the overhead lights began to flicker violently. One by one, they started going out, plunging sections of the store into darkness. The whispers grew louder, mingling with a faint, distorted humming noise. Tom abandoned his cart and sprinted toward the exit. But when he reached the sliding doors, they didn't open. He waved his hands frantically in front of the sensor, but the doors remained stubbornly shut. The glass seemed to ripple, as though something was pressing against it from the other side. A sharp bang echoed behind him. Tom turned to see the man in the trench coat standing near the registers, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Tom could feel the man's gaze boring into him. The whispers rose to a crescendo, and Tom realized they were coming from the man. "Leave," the whispers hissed in unison, distorted and layered as if spoken by 100 voices at once. "But you can't." The man began to move, his steps slow and deliberate, the sound of his boots echoing unnaturally in the empty store. Desperate, Tom turned and pounded on the glass doors, shouting for help. His cries were met with silence, the parking lot beyond appearing distorted, like a scene from a warped dream. Tom's panic reached its peak as the man closed the distance between them. Just as the figure reached out a skeletal hand, the lights snapped back on. The whispers ceased and the store was silent once more. Tom turned to find the man gone, as though he had never been there. Without hesitation, Tom grabbed a nearby trash can and hurled it at the glass doors. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, and cold night air flooded in. He stumbled out into the parking lot, shards crunching beneath his feet. As he climbed into his car and sped away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The man in the trench coat stood in the broken doorway, watching him go. His face was finally visible, pale, hollow, and grinning with impossibly sharp teeth. Tom didn't stop driving until he reached his parents' house hours later. He never spoke about what happened that night, but he avoided Walmarts for the rest of his life. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, he swore he could see the figure of a man in a trench coat standing at the edge of the shadows, waiting.
Story number 3.
On a damp, foggy night, a single mother named Carla found herself at a Walmart in the outskirts of town. Her shift at the diner had run late, and her young daughter, Emily, was running low on diapers and formula. Despite the eerie stillness of the hour, Carla knew she had no choice but to make the trip. She parked her aging car near the front of the lot, its headlights cutting through the fog before flickering out. Inside, the store was almost entirely deserted. A few aisles were cluttered with abandoned carts, as if their owners had left in a hurry. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, their glow uneven and cold. Carla wrapped her coat tighter around herself as she grabbed a cart and headed toward the baby section. The first few minutes passed uneventfully. Carla found the diapers and formula she needed, along with a few snacks for herself. She was about to turn into the toiletries aisle when she heard it, a faint giggle. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a child's playful laughter. It was higher pitched, distorted, and echoing in a way that felt wrong. "Hello?" Carla called out, her voice quivering slightly. There was no response, only the faint squeak of her cartwheels as she continued forward. As she moved through the aisles, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, but the store seemed empty. Then she saw it, just for a split second, a figure darting past the end of the aisle, low to the ground and unnaturally fast. Carla froze, gripping the cart handle tightly. "Is someone there?" she demanded, her voice louder now, tinged with panic. Again, no answer. She quickened her pace, heading toward the front of the store. But as she neared the checkout lanes, the air grew colder. Her breath fogged in front of her, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind her, soft and scuttling, like bare feet on linoleum. Carla spun around, but the aisle behind her was empty. The footsteps stopped as suddenly as they had started, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. She abandoned her cart and made a beeline for the exit. The sliding doors didn't open. She waved her hands in front of the sensor, but nothing happened. The lights above the doors flickered, casting erratic shadows across the floor. Carla's heart pounded as she pulled at the doors, but they wouldn't budge. That's when she heard it again, the giggle. This time, it was much closer. Slowly, Carla turned around. Standing at the end of the aisle was a small figure. It looked like a child at first glance, but something about it was horribly off. Its head was too large for its body, and its eyes were wide and completely black, reflecting the fluorescent light like twin pools of oil. Its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "Mommy!" it whispered in a voice that was both childlike and chillingly inhuman. Carla screamed and backed away, pressing herself against the unyielding doors. The figure began to move toward her, its limbs jerking unnaturally with each step. As it approached, the air grew even colder, and the lights above flickered violently. Desperate, Carla grabbed a nearby display rack and hurled it toward the creature. The rack toppled, scattering boxes of candy and snacks across the floor. For a moment, the figure disappeared from view. Carla seized the opportunity to run, darting down a side aisle in search of another exit. The giggles followed her, echoing through the store. She turned corner after corner, but every path seemed to lead her back to the same spot, the end of the baby aisle. It was as if the store itself were alive, bending reality to keep her trapped. Out of options, Carla ducked into the employee-only stockroom. The space was cluttered with boxes and dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. She crouched behind a stack of pallets, her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. The giggles stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the far corner of the room, came a soft scraping sound. It grew louder and closer, accompanied by the faint patter of those inhuman footsteps. Carla squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face as she silently prayed for help. When she opened her eyes, the creature was inches away from her. Its grotesque grin widened as it tilted its head, studying her like a predator savoring its prey. "Time to play," it hissed. Carla let out a blood-curdling scream and bolted, knocking over boxes in her path. She didn't stop running until she reached the loading dock at the back of the store. She threw herself against the emergency exit door, and to her astonishment, it opened, setting off a deafening alarm. She stumbled into the cold night air, her heart racing as she sprinted toward her car. Behind her, the alarm was abruptly cut off, replaced by the echoing sound of that distorted giggle. She didn't look back. When Carla finally reached her car and peeled out of the parking lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the fog, just beyond the store's broken doors, was the figure, its black eyes glinting in the darkness. It raised a hand in a mockery of a wave as she disappeared into the night. Carla never told anyone about what happened that night, but she refused to set foot in another Walmart again. And sometimes, when she was alone late at night, she swore she could still hear that awful giggle echoing in the distance.